So Craig, welcome to London Mozart Players at Home, Sofa Sundays. You've already very kindly given us that wonderful recital a few weeks back, which I know a lot of people really enjoyed, myself included. Thank you so much again for that.
Pleasure.
It's such a shame that we haven't seen you live. This was the year of your LMP comeback, and it all went by the board.
Yeah.
When we first met, it was with London Mozart Players donkeys years ago.
When you and I first met, I was filling in for Nicola at a gig for the lovely Colin Kirby Green in Brightlingsea with Paul Barrett.
Right. Gosh, that was the first time.
Yeah. So I haven't played with the London Mozart Players proper. I did do something with you and the female leader. Was it Mary?
No.
At an AGM.
Gosh. Susie.
Anyway, Susie.
Susie, yes.
I had the last syllable right.
But did you never play with the orchestra?
No.
We haven't done the Rodrigo?
No.
Are you sure?
I'm absolutely sure.
Okay.
It was
convinced that we had.
No, I've been very lucky with, I play more concertos than most guitarists, partially due to my prior experience in orchestra as a percussionist when I was growing up in Perth.
Right.
And although I'd given up actually studying percussion properly around the time I entered university, there was such a dearth of percussionists in Perth at that time that I had some really good professional work with the West Australian Symphony Orchestra with great conductors and great repertoire. I was sort of the fifth, extra percussionist, as it were. I think they had two regulars, a timpanist and a principal percussionist, and then everyone after that were sort of casuals, and I was way down the line. But
right.
I did some amazing work. I played with the West Australian Youth Orchestra, the West Australian Youth Concert Band. I played more percussion while I was studying guitar at university than I did guitar, which is a reflection of its position as an orchestral instrument. But when I came to the UK, I was able to sell myself as a guitarist with orchestral experience who could count, follow, listen, turn up on time and sight read. And that led to ultimately a lot of concerto opportunities.
Yeah.
But London Mozart Players was one that had eluded me down the years until relatively recently. And then we were Kyboshed by Corona.
But I think we've got plans to make it happen next year.
I hope so. Yeah.
And that's with the Rodrigo Concerto, which is the one everybody knows. How many times have you played it?
I think I'm in the upwards of 250.
Wow.
But that's over a long period of time. I don't normally have the opportunity to play it more than 10 to 15 times in a year. So, compared to a successful pianist playing Beethoven or whatever it might be, it's not massive. But in guitar terms, it is relatively substantial. But I've never wearied of it. I don't do it often enough to become bored with it at all. And it's technically really challenging. So it's always, an experience, a rewarding experience, and I have to be well prepared. And I appreciate that it's a piece that means a lot to people. So nothing about that relatively large number of performances is meant to suggest that I'm remotely blasé or even take the piece for granted.
What do you think's made it so popular? Is it the exposure on Classic FM?
I think it was pretty much a hit straight away.
Yeah.
And I think really it comes down to that very beautiful tune. Somehow Rodrigo in the slow movement.
Yeah.
Rodrigo captured
tune. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I really look forward to it next year. Actually, you were saying just before we started this, that you're actually making some, you're relearning it with different fingering or something. What's that about?
Well, Rodrigo didn't write well for the guitar, despite the fact that there's a vast amount of stuff. He wrote characterfully for the guitar, but frequently it doesn't sit very well. And there are numerous little, very small examples within each movement where he's written certain things that are either unplayable or really not optimal for the sake of the music. So there are a series of little adaptations that are passed down from generation to generation and just written usually in, you know, in red pen in someone's score or something. And I've been doing that for students over all the years, the 20 plus years I've been teaching at the Royal Northern, and I'm just a bit weary of it. So now I've had the time to, you know, pump it all into music notation, to add some explanatory notes, all of the fingerings that I use, explanations about fingerings that other people use. It's like, rather than it looking like a published score, it's like a teaching score. And I've really enjoyed doing it, and my students have enjoyed it. But so yeah, and I'm actually having a little conversation with Schott at the moment about whether they might consider a new edition, because I think the commonly used one was fingered by Angel Romero, one of the very famous Romero guitar playing family, in 1984. And he's a phenomenal guitarist, but I think it's time some of these accepted changes were discussed a little more openly, perhaps in the new edition.
So apart from the Rodrigo Concerto, what other concertos would you sell to the average listener who loves the sound of the guitar, wants to hear a concerto, only knows the Rodrigo? What else is there?
Well, if you like that Rodrigo Concerto, logically, then you would look at the other one, the other main one that he wrote, the Fantasia per un gentilhombre, the gentleman of the title being Segovia. It's another beautiful piece full of Rodrigo's characterful writing. There was actually a third one called Concierto para una fiesta that he wrote late. It's well into the 80s, I think, and which would also have been into his 80s. And it's fun on a first listening, but it doesn't have the same depth as the other two pieces. The other concertos that leap to mind as their core repertoire, and they're beautiful, very accessible pieces, would be the Concerto by Villa-Lobos, a Brazilian composer. Mauro Giuliani is a contemporary of Beethoven, an Italian composer. He wrote a number of concertos, but the Opus 30 in A is chock full of tunes, and it's lively and wonderful. Malcolm Arnold wrote a beautiful concerto. Bits of it are lyrical and beautiful, like a bit like Vaughan Williams or Elgar, and other bits are more quirky in an Arnold kind of way. Castelnuovo-Tedesco, an Italian composer who emigrated to the US to escape the Second World War, wrote a number of concertos, but his one in D is particularly beautiful and popular. Nigel Westlake, an Australian composer who is very famous in Australia, both as film and television composer, but more significantly there as a composer of concert works, has written a number of pieces for guitar and orchestra, and it's stunning, colourful, pictorial music. I could literally go on and on. There's a great piece by Aaron J. Kernis, a New York-based composer, for guitar and violin and orchestra. Takamitsu.
Wow.
I could go.
So there's an awful lot more we could look forward to. Have you commissioned pieces yourself?
I have. I've had a concerto. Well, the one on the go at the moment is by a composer called David Knotts for the BBC Concert Orchestra, and obviously that's all been put back. I'm not exactly sure. It was supposed to be happening next January, but that will certainly be put back. Gerard Brophy, another Australian composer, was a co-commission between Symphony Australia and the BBC Philharmonic. There was a lovely man called Arthur Butterworth, who used to play trumpet with the Halle, who wrote a concerto for me and the Leeds Symphony Orchestra. Lovely piece. And I'm sure there's it's a bit disturbing when you can't remember, but there've been a number. Oh, Andy Scott, wonderful Northwest-based composer, saxophonist, member of the Apollo Sax Quartet, brilliant composer. He wrote a great concerto for me and the Northern Chamber Orchestra, which I've played in this country and in Australia as well. So yeah, it's a burgeoning market. Yeah,
well, great. I hope we get to hear some of those.
Yeah.
So you said before that you started off as a percussionist when you were in Perth, presumably as a student percussionist then, before you...
For me, the guitar was always first. I started playing the guitar when I was 7, and then I was at school learning the guitar, and my two brothers, one older, one younger, my older brother played the clarinet, younger one played the trumpet, and they were in the school wind band. They didn't teach strings at my school, so it was all, you know, a million flutes and clarinets. Yeah. And they were always going on great trips around the state, and the guitarists never went anywhere. So I talked to the music teacher about doing something. Originally I had the oboe in mind, but what they really needed was a percussionist. So they stuck me up the back with a snare drum and some music I couldn't decipher. And everyone, you know, you make a noise on percussion and everyone in that context turns around to look at you. It was a very strange experience until you get used to it. And so I started lessons from the age of 13 and absolutely loved it. It's the most wonderful second instrument for a guitarist, because guitar is relatively solitary and relatively quiet, while percussion is social and noisy.
I was just thinking, I couldn't think of two more diverse things. I mean, when you're a percussionist, you just have to take all courage in your hands. You make that hit or whatever. There's no escaping from it. The guitar, presumably, you can just sort of feel your way in if you're so minded.
The only way, you're absolutely right. There's no hiding as a percussionist. Similarly, though, solo guitar is very exposed. It's a very sparse texture compared to other chamber music or even piano, solo piano. So that feeling of being exposed is actually quite similar from one instrument to the other. But I can definitely remember some key errors I've made playing percussion where you can only apologize afterwards.
So going back to your 10-year-old self or another young would-be guitarist, what advice would you give them to set off on this road you've taken? What would you say to your 10-year-old self? What advice would you give?
In a practical sense, I would encourage my 10-year-old self to do just 10 to 20 minutes a day of practice rather than trying to binge on one day of the week. It's really hammered home to me over the years that we acquire skills most effectively when they're drip fed rather than binge learned. So yes, in a practical sense, I would just say 10, 15 minutes a day is a really good thing to be doing when you're 10. I didn't really get practicing properly until I was a little bit older. And the other thing is not to give up and to always try to keep loving it. It's not necessarily the most easy of careers, but I've never fallen out of love with the sound the guitar makes and other instruments as well. And the collegiate experience of making music with other people is incredibly important to me. And there are many, many wonderful things about making music either at an amateur or a professional level. And I hope that this whole experience with coronavirus will just reinforce how important creativity is to us as humans, and most importantly, how incredibly important it is for us to make music together with other musicians in front of audiences. And I hope people will come out of this valuing that all the more for having been starved of it for a period of time.
I think that's the thing many of us are missing the most. You know, you can sit at home and practice and learn new repertoire and make arrangements and all the things you've been doing, but actually it's the physical act of just playing to people. And that emotional conversation,
yes,
which is so important. What was the last concert you did before lockdown? Can you remember?
Oh, it was incredible. It was with David Juritz, who I know you know,
of course,
and with Milos Milivojevic, the wonderful Serbian accordion player. I think we must have done one of the last live concerts in the UK. We were at the Fairfield Halls in Croydon for a lunchtime concert, and it was, I think, a day or two before lockdown. Wow. And so yeah, the venue decided to go ahead, and we, a small audience came, but things were certainly quieting down at that time. Yeah. And so that was, so a wonderful, enjoyable gig to do. And David had made an amazing arrangement of Firebird Suite. for the three of us.
Good God.
Which is extraordinary.
Wow.
And that's on the back of his incredible arrangement of the Goldberg variations for violin, guitar, and cello, which we'd done with Tim Hugh and Adrian Bradbury on cello at various times, depending on availabilities. And that's so he is an absolute powerhouse of music making. And
well, we
that was
know him
a real
well,
joy.
Mozart players, obviously.
Absolutely.
Is that where you two met? No, because you didn't come into the Mozart players. So.
No. Well, I met David, I think, for the first time on Anglesey, where we must have both been playing in a festival in Beaumaris. And his kids were great and chaotic, and he was fantastic and chaotic. And so for the last, 12 years or more, we've been playing together in the London Tango Quintet. With Milosz, Richard Price on double bass, and David Gordon on piano, and then we do things, reduced versions of that with me, Milosz, and David. David and I have done things together. I've played in his Burton Bradstock Festival many times now, every year for the last 16 years or something. So David's a great friend, and as a musician, I couldn't admire him more either.
Yeah. Because you alluded before to the fact that being a guitarist is a lonely occupation. So actually playing with other people in any case is terribly important in your life. But I mean, I suppose the guitar as an instrument evolved as an accompanying instrument.
Yes,
it didn't evolve as a solo instrument initially. It was something that enabled one to go out and about and serenade, but it's really important for you to have chamber music in your life.
Absolutely so, particularly having played so much percussion as well and appreciated the joy and the sheer power of playing in a symphony orchestra. Musically and socially, it's just this massive upswell of feeling through that. And so because I was lucky enough to learn to play with people and to be sympathetic to other people's way of feeling phrases or counting rhythms or whatever it might be, I love that interactivity. And, when you're doing solo concerts, that's incredibly rewarding. It's sort of the pinnacle of playing the guitar is to do solo recitals, but it doesn't involve that essential interaction that chamber music does provide. So I love to do it. And I always think that I'm probably, depending on the age of who's involved, I'm probably one of the least experienced chamber musicians compared to people who spend their life doing it. So I just sit there sponging up what other people feel and think and how they communicate. And so for me, every single time I play with other people in any context, it's just a rich learning experience.
Well, that's really great to hear. Well, I'm really looking forward to having you come into Mozart Players.
Me too.
Play Rodrigo with us. I really hope you get to play some of the other concertos with us. There's also Leo Brouwer.
Yeah, multiple.
I remember years ago we did a project with Julian Bream, doing several pieces.
Yes.
Barbican. They're worth exploring.
They're great pieces too. I haven't had the opportunity to perform them live, but there are 5 or 6 concertos, and he's a very characterful composer. And he's also a guitarist. He writes very well for the guitar, so it's a bonus.
Well, Craig, thank you so much for talking to us today, and we really look forward to welcoming you for live concerts in 2021. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sebastian.
Thank you so much.